We are live. Good early afternoon. I'm Andy Andrews. If you joined us for the first time, you have stumbled on the Blue Plate Special. This is a time of lunchtime, learning, and laughter. We're broadcasting live here, hey Chris, from the Financial District here in Orange Beach, Alabama. We're on the skyscraper at the wharf on the west side. I have to think about that. Okay, the west side. And we're glad you're here. I'm wearing a shirt from the Sand Dollar Lifestyles, the cornerstone here of the wharf. And it's a beautiful day out there. It's still January, isn't it? Isn't it still January? Okay, yeah, it's still January. And it's like 95 degrees. I mean, it's really hot. It's really hot. Bonnie Nix, you already back in Kentucky? You're right here Tuesday. Oh, no, today's Tuesday, isn't it? She was right here Thursday. I can't keep it straight. Dina Kilpatrick, how you doing? We'll hear from you. We got people in the studio audience from all over the United States and out of the country. Where's the people from Wisconsin? People from Wisconsin, how are you doing? I know you guys are just laughing and chuckling at the warmth, aren't you? Because I talked to a buddy in Wisconsin yesterday and it was 2. Let's see, from Michigan. Where are you? Michiganders. Hey. How are you doing? Maine. Way up in Maine. Oh my gosh. That's very cold. Very lobstery. Tennessee. Hey, Tennessee. All right. How you doing? Tennessee. Indiana. Hey, Indiana. We'll tell Bill and Gloria hi for you. Illinois. Does it bother you guys when people say Illinois? Yeah, it does. I can tell. Yeah, that would bother me too. And then to double down on it and go Chicago, Illinois. I heard a guy get introduced that way. From Chicago, Illinois. It's like, oh my God. And my wife was right beside me, and she's the grammar Nazi, and she was like about to come out of her seat. Do you know who it was being introduced? It was Paul Harvey, years ago. Somebody was introducing Paul Harvey. Please welcome from Chicago, Illinois. I miss Paul Harvey. Do you guys miss Paul Harvey? I miss Paul Harvey. You know, besides being from Chicago, Illinois, Paul Harvey, you know why he had that odd cadence? You know, he would talk like this and then he would stop and then go on. And then talk real fast and then stop and say some more things. You know how he developed that? Is when he first started doing radio, it was all live, and he had to end like when that second hand swept the 12, and he would do all his commentary, but you know it's easier to end earlier than to just get cut off in the middle. So he would be talking and looking at the clock, and he'd go, "Here in Chicago, the wind stopped blowing yesterday, and many people fell down. That's the news. Paul Harvey." Good day, and then it would be over. That's what he did. So, Kentucky. Where's Kentucky? Somebody signed in for Kentucky and then left, huh? Okay. More Indiana and Wisconsin. And we got Arkansas back there. And then from out of the country, Fairhope. How you doing? That's Leslie Ann's mama. Are you keeping control of her? Leslie Ann Tarabella is in our studio audience today. She'd probably be in here hosting this. She'd make more sense than I would. But we're glad you're here. We're glad you're here. Just keep control of Leslie Ann while you're in. You raised her well, though. You raised her well. We're going to talk about poetry today. How about that? Now, I know most times if I would say, thank you, it's Froggy on Orange Beach. It has been foggy today. Kids there from Ohio, Margaret Davis Hopp. From Mississippi, Kathy Allen. From Bon Secour, wow. Linda Buckner, Billy Morgan. From Frozen Kerrville, Texas, Serena Stoll Garner. From Thornville, Arkansas, Christy Woods, my sister. Hey, Christy. Mark Nicholson, Tulsa. We got started talking about poetry a couple of weeks ago, and we actually wrote the first of a poem. And I'll tell you how I've gotten kind of reinterested, because when I would say that, normally you would say, hey, we're going to talk about poetry, and everybody would like, oh God. Because I just, the way I felt about it in school, hey, Heather Olson, in freezing Utah, I remember how I felt about it in school, and they not only made us read poetry, made us memorize poetry. Leslie Ann, did you have to memorize poetry? When I got married, I married Polly Young. That was her last name, Young. And when we started having babies, I told her, I said, you can name them whatever you want to name them, as long as you name them with an A. And she said, seriously? I said, yeah, just A names, that's fine. Whatever you want to name them, A names. She said, why is that? I said, because I've been first in line for everything my entire life. I would be first in line for the shots, and then I'd sit there and laugh at everybody else. And she said, well, I get it. I was last in line, young, but she said, but I had more time to memorize my poem in the 8th grade. Yeah, that's true. Do you remember your poem that you memorized in the 8th grade? Anybody remember it? I memorized The Wreck of the Hesperus. You guys aren't acting impressed. But I did memorize that. And here's what I remember about it today. The Wreck of the Hesperus. That's pretty much it. I can't even remember who wrote it. But that's all I got. That stuff, it didn't mean anything to me. I did get spanked. I got paddled by Coach Hardy at for poetry. We were given poems to memorize, and I was supposed to memorize Trees by Joyce Kilmer. You remember? I think that I shall never see a thing so lovely as a tree that may in summer wear something from birds everywhere, or something like. And but I did. I think that I shall never know a thing so lovely as my toe, a toe that will in summer wear scabs from stumps everywhere. And I got a paddling for that. I thought I was being creative. So, but I gotta spank it. But we hated poetry then, and it bothered me. And then a few weeks ago, I was reading an outdoor article, and this guy was telling the story of this deer hunt and how before dawn on opening day of deer season when he was growing up, he and his cousin would be in a deer blind together, and the uncle would read to them a poem called The Cremation of Sam McGee. And they put a couple of lines of this in there, and I thought, well, that actually sounds interesting. That actually sounds interesting. I can see why little boys would like that. It's kind of a funny poem. And then after I read the article, I looked up who wrote Cremation of Sam McGee, and it was a guy named Robert W. Service. And I found out some amazing things about Robert W. Service. And I've also had I've come to some hard conclusions about poetry and today's world and why it was popular then and why not now. But Robert W. Service was born in Canada in the 1800s. And when he was like 18 or 19, he moved to the Yukon, the gold rush. And he could write in rhyme. And so he had written some stuff and read them in saloons and all. And a publisher in 1903, now think of these dollar signs in 1903. In 1903, a publisher paid him $100,000 for 40 poems. $100,000. That's several million today. And so he like figured he was onto something, which he was, and he kept writing. He came out with a book called The Songs of a Sourdough. And in that book was one of the poems was The Cremation of Sam McGee. And in 1907, that book sold 3 million copies. Leslie Ann, are you hearing me? 3 million copies. And so then he he drove an ambulance in World War I and wrote a thing called The Verses of an Ambulance Driver. And that sold millions of copies. He wrote this one called Ballads of a Cheechako, which I don't even know what a Cheechako is, but that book sold millions of copies. This book was when? This was in 1909. And so after World War I, he moved to Paris, and he's there with Gertrude Stein and Hemingway and all these people, but he's the rich one. I mean, he's the only one that has any money. They're all struggling, and he has tons of money. And yet, it doesn't seem like anybody remembers him. But people were, like, poets were, like, really after him. They just didn't like him because they said it's just like trash. You know, he's just writing trash. And he just kind of laughed and said, I'm not writing poetry, I'm writing verses. And so but he wrote what people liked. And I don't think anything's wrong with that. You know, I mean, it gets people reading, gets people interested in doing something like that of their own. And so I thought I would read you to start our day of poetry, because we wrote half a poem the other day and we sent it out and let several people finish it. And so we're going to give you their efforts today. But I'm also going to read you some modern poetry that I think you'll like and explain it. But this is called, from Robert W. Service, 1909, The Ballad of Blasphemous Bill. And I think the other thing that interests me about this is you read a lot of stuff that's 100 years old, and it just doesn't hold up. I mean, you can't understand the words, and he's using stuff that's, you know, you can't read it today. And this, I've read several of these to my boys, and they're into it, you know. But my boys are into country music, which, when you think about it, it's just poems, all right? So here we go. The Ballad of Blasphemous Bill. I took a contract to bury the body of Blasphemous Bill Mackay, wherever, whenever, or whatsoever the manner of death he die. Whether he die in the light of day or under the peak-faced moon, in cabin or dance hall, camp or dive, muclucs or patent shoon, on velvet tundra or virgin peak, by glacier, drift, or draw, in muskeg hollow or canyon gloom, by avalanche, fang, or claw, by battle, murder, or sudden wealth, by pestilence, hooch, or lead, I swore on the book I would follow and look till I found the tombless dead. For Bill was a dainty kind of cuss, and his mind was mighty sot, on a dinky patch with flowers and grass and a civilized boneyard lot. And where he died or how he died, it didn't matter a damn, so long as he had a grave with frills and a tombstone epigram. So I promised him, and he paid the price in good Cheechako coin, which the same I blowed that very night, down eating a tenderloin. Then I painted the 3-foot slab of pine, here lies poor Bill Mackay, and I hung it up on my cabin wall, and I waited for Bill to die. Years passed away, and at last one day came a squaw with a story strange, of a long deserted line of traps way back of the Bighorn Range, of a little hut by the Great Divide, and a white man, stiff and still, lying there by his lonesome self, and I figured it must be Bill. So I thought of the contract I'd made with him, and I took down from the shelf that swell black box with the silver plate he'd picked out for himself. I packed it full of grub and hooch, and I slung it on the sleigh. Then I harnessed up my team of dogs and was off at dawn of day. You know what it's like in the Yukon wild when it's 69 below, when the ice worms wriggle their purple heads through the cusp of the pale blue snow, when the pine trees crack like rifle guns in the silence of the wood, and the icicles hang like tusks underneath the parka hood, when the stovepipe smoke breaks sudden off and the sky is weirdly lit, and the careless feel of a bit of steel burns like a red-hot spit, when the mercury is a frozen ball and the frost fiend stalks to kill. Well, it was just like that the day when I set out to look for Bill. Oh, the awful hush that seemed to crush me down on every hand as I blundered blind with a trail to find through that blank and bitter land, half dazed, half crazed in the winter wild with his grim heart-breaking woes and the ruthless strife for a grip on life that only the sourdough knows. North by the compass, north I pressed, river and peak and plain. Past like a dream I slept to lose, and I waked to dream again. River and plain and mighty peak, and who could stand unawed as their summits blazed? He could stand undazed at the foot of the throne of God. North, north, through the land accursed, shunned by the scouring brutes, and all I heard was my own harsh word and the whine of my malamutes. Till at last I came to the cabin squat, built in the side of a hill, and I burst in the door, and there on the floor, frozen to death, lay Bill. Ice, white ice, like a winding sheet, sheathing each smoke-grimed wall. Ice on the stovepipe, ice on the bed, ice gleaming over all. Sparkling ice on the dead man's chest, glittering ice in his hair, ice on his fingers, ice in his heart, ice in his glassy stare. Hard as log and tressed like a frog with his arms and legs outspread, I gazed at the coffin I'd brought for him, and I gazed at the gruesome dead. At last I spoke. Bill liked his joke, but still, God darn his eyes, a man had oughter consider his mates and the way he goes and dies. Have you ever stood in an Arctic hut in the shadow of the pole with a little coffin 6x3 and a grief you can't control? Have you ever sat by a frozen corpse that looks at you with a grin and that seems to say, you may try all day, but you'll never jam me in? I'm not a man of the quitting kind, but I never felt so blue, and I sat there gazing at that stiff and studying what to do. Then I rose and I kicked off the husky dogs that were nosing round about, and I lit a roaring fire in the stove, and I started to thaw Bill out. Well, I thawed and thawed for 13 days, but it didn't seem no good. His arms and legs stuck out like pegs as if they was made of wood. Till at last I said, it ain't no use, he's froze too hard to thaw. He's obstinate, and he won't lie straight. So I guess I got to saw. So I sawed off poor Bill's arms and legs, and I laid him snug and straight. In the little coffin he picked hisself with the dinky silver plate. And I came nigh to shedding a tear as I nailed him safely down. Then I stowed him away in my Yukon sleigh, and I started back to town. So I buried him as the contract was, in a large and narrow deep, and there he's waiting for the great clean-up when the judgment sluice heads sweep. And I smoke my pipe, and I meditate in the light of the midnight sun, and I sometimes wonder if they was the awful things I done. And as I sit and the parson talks, expounding on the law, I often think of poor old Bill and how hard he was to saw. Is that great? And I'm telling you, you put that in the 8th grade literature book, and everybody will be happy. Hey, old man, Kevin Perkins is here. Sandra Mendonca. Happy birthday to you, Sandra. All right, so my theory is that now Robert Service made more with that $100 advance on those 40 poems he wrote first than Robert Frost, the poet laureate of the United States of America, ever made in his entire career put together. And so somewhere along the line, capitalism just took over, and somebody said, hey, you know, if they ain't going to buy it, I'm going to write it. And so then somebody said, well, if we put music to it, Jimmy Erie is here with us. Jimmy Erie is the songwriter who has 3 different Song of the Year awards, 14 number ones, and 4 different genres. Jimmy is a contributor to WisdomHarbor.com, teaches guitar lessons, among other things. And Jimmy said that was an awesome poem. It was. I'm loving this guy. But somewhere along the line, somebody said, if we put music to it. And so my theory is that the greatest poets today, I mean, because you don't hear, I mean, who makes a living as a poet? Nobody. Okay? But our greatest poets are songwriters. You know, I'm going to do a show, a podcast, talking about poetry, because when we put the cremation of Sam McGee on Wisdom Harbor, you know who commented first? Gloria Gaither. She said, "Oh, I'm so glad that you put that on there." And I said, "You know who Robert Service is?" She said, "Oh yeah. Bill and I talked about him all the time with Stuart Hamlin. Stuart Hamlin turned him on. Stuart Hamlin is the guy who wrote "It Is No Secret What God Can Do." He's the one who wrote that. And he was a big Robert Service fan. And so Gloria started finding him in bookstores in Alaska. And so we're going to do a podcast. Gloria and I are going to, and we're going to talk about poetry and why some of it hits, why some of it doesn't. But I told Polly last night, you know, here's Gloria Gaither, songwriter of the century on ASCAP. So that means she's the poet of the century, right? Jimmy Erie is a poet. Jerry Reed, my friend Jerry Reed, was a poet. And here is one of his great poetesses. A poetess? Yeah, you know, just a new word for a poem. And this one is called Amos Moses. So I'm just going to read this. It's a song, but I'm going to read it to you like a poem. Now Amos Moses was a Cajun. He lived by himself in the swamp. He hunted alligator for a living. He'd just knock him in the head with the stomp. The Louisiana law gonna get you, Amos. It ain't legal hunting alligator down in the swamp, boy. Now everybody blamed his old man for making him mean as a snake. When Amos Moses was a boy, his daddy would use him for alligator bait. Tie a rope around his waist, throw him in the swamp. Alligator bait in the Louisiana bayou. About 45 minutes southeast of Thibodaux, Louisiana, lived a man called Doc Millsap and his pretty wife Hannah. Well, they raised up a boy that could eat up his weight in groceries. Named him after a man of the cloth. Called him Amos Moses. Now, the folks around South Louisiana said Amos was a hell of a man. He could trap the meanest alligator and just use one hand. That's all they got left, 'cause the alligator bit it. Left arm gone, clean up to the elbow. Well, the sheriff got wind that Amos was in the swamp tracking alligator skin, so he snuck in the swamp, gonna get the boy, but he never come out again. Well, I wonder where the Louisiana sheriff got to. Well, you can sure get lost in the Louisiana bayou. About 45 minutes southeast of Thibodaux, Louisiana, lived a cat called Doc Millsap and his pretty wife Hannah. Well, they raised up a son that could eat up his weight in groceries, named him after a man of the cloth, called him Amos Moses. Now there's an 8th grade literature book thing there. I mean, you hadn't got to write. You hadn't got to have that in song to enjoy that. Now, here is a poem that Jimmy Erie wrote. Okay. Now he put it to music, but this poem won the CMA Song of the Year and the ACM Song of the Year. And it's a poem called I Drive Your Truck. So listen to this as a poem, okay? 89 cents in the ashtray, half-empty bottle of Gatorade rolling in the floorboard, that dirty Brave cap on the dash, dog tags hanging from the rear view, old Skull can and cowboy boots and a Go Army shirt folded in the back. This thing burns gas like crazy, but that's all right. People got their ways of coping. Oh, and I've got mine. I drive your truck. I roll every window down and I burn up. Every back road in this town, I find a field, I tear it up, till all the pane's a cloud of dust. Yeah, sometimes I drive your truck. I leave that radio playing, same old country station where you left it. Yeah, man, I crank it up. You'd probably punch my arm right now if you saw this tear rolling down my face. Hey, man, I'm trying to be tough. And Mama asked me this morning if I'd been by your grave, but that flag of stone ain't where I feel you anyway. I've cussed, I've prayed, I've said goodbye, I've shook my fist and asked God why these days, when I'm missing you this much, I drive your truck. I roll every window down and I burn up. Every back road in this town, I find a field, I tear it up, till all the pane's a cloud of dust. Yes, sometimes, brother, sometimes I drive your truck. I hope you don't mind. I hope you don't mind. I drive your truck. Now, if you haven't heard the song version of that, you need to get on it right away. But that is, I mean, without the music, it's just pure poetry. I mean, that's just what it is. Now, Jimmy writes serious songs. Mark Lowry wrote a serious song. I tend to be more inspired by Jerry Reed. You know, when I hear those rhymes that go on and on and on and on, like I think it's back in '73 when Eating My Cooking got the better of me, and that's what it is. I think it was back in '73 when Eating My Cooking got the better of me, and I asked this little girl I was going with to be my wife. Well, she said she would, and I said I do, but I'd have said I wouldn't if I'd have just knew how saying I do was going to screw up all of my life. That's she got the gold mine, I got the shaft. And I love that, pouring that rhyme on that rhyme. So I took a shot at it, and I wrote a poem called Jimmy Dean Saved My Life. I had just got home from the grocery store, took my stuff from the car, and got in the back door when I was reaching in the dark for the switch to the overhead light. I turned it on, the feller jumped out, he had a pistol, so I knew what this was about. "Stick 'em up," said the burglar, "and don't even try to fight." I put my groceries on the floor, moving real slow. "Are you hungry?" I asked him, and he said no. I said, "I'd hate for you to leave without a bite to eat." "I got some Jimmy Dean sausage," I said with a grin, "and I must say you're looking mighty thin. The skillets on the stove won't take more'n a minute to heat." Well, he relaxed a bit and let his gun hand waver, said, "I still might shoot you, but I'll accept the favor, and I must say you're a forgiving example of the human race." Now, the sausage was frozen in a 5-pound roll. That meat was harder than a telephone pole. I picked it up like a bat and hit him full on in the face. His knees buckled when I hit him, but he held on to the gun. Then Jimmy popped his elbow, which must have hurt a ton, but the robber stayed upright like his head was on a tee. So I took the proper grip, kept my head down, got my backswing going, whipped the frozen meat around. Now, I must admit my drive could have been off a degree. It was a slice for sure, 'cause his noggin went right. I swung the sausage again, this time hooked it a mite, but now he's off the leaderboard and in the rough, I guarantee. Yeah, this is a story how Jimmy Dean came to my rescue. If you buy his sausage, he might just help you too. You can count on Big Bad John when there's danger, fear, and strife. I'm living proof, 'cause Jimmy Dean saved my life. So that's my attempt at a Jerry Reed song. I wish Jerry was still alive. Now, have we heard from Mark? Check my email right there. Just see if I've gotten an email from Mark.
He texted you and said, "I'm sorry."
Oh, he's texted me and said, "I'm sorry?"
Yeah.
Oh, God. All right, so skip this part. So here's what we did. And I'll tell you about Mark in a minute. So a couple of weeks ago, we wrote the first of a poem. And here's what we started with. Okay, you ready? Ready, Matthew? She was a Yankee girl, didn't like the cold, so she headed south as soon as she got old enough to leave. She made Jacksonville by noon the next day. By sunset, the girl had found a place to stay. She was just gearing up to get hired someplace. She had tricks up her sleeve, and one was an ace. By 8:35, she headed to the beach, hit A1A, and could hear her daddy preach in her head. She shook it off, geared down, stopped in Ponte Vedra. There, a gas station attendant said, "It sure is good to see you." And that's what we did. And so when we got to that part, we said, okay, people, take it. And we had 3 poets that took it. And okay, and I'm see, here's Mark. Here's Mark. See, I figured that these people had 3 weeks to write it. But I called Mark Lowry and Jimmy Yeary this morning with a couple of hours. And I said, "You want to take a tag at this? You want to hit this? See what you get in a couple of hours?" And of course, both of them said, "Of course." Here's Jimmy has written number ones. Mark has written like the Bonanza song of the world, wrote "Mary, Did You Know?" Mark said, "You did only ask me to do this morning. I write slowly." Because Jimmy has turned one in for us, okay? But Mark did not. So Mark, I was going to read "Mary, Did You Know" like a poem, but we'll wait till you turn yours in, then we'll read your "Mary, Did You Know," and then read that. But because I think "Mary, Did You Know" is poetry too. Not to mention that Mark makes $50 million a year, from all the people who are singing it. And Mark is over in Houston living in a castle now. He's got a moat and a castle. And Mark, did you know Mark wears a crown, Matt? He wears a crown now. I'm just kidding. All right. So Kathleen Thurnaw, this is what she wrote. All 3 of these are great, I thought. All right, so here we go. I'm going to read the first and carry it on with what she got. She was a Yankee girl, didn't like the cold, so she headed south as soon as she got old enough to leave. She made Jacksonville by noon the next day. By sunset, the girl had found a place to stay. She was just gearing up to get hired someplace. She had tricks up her sleeve, and one was an ace. By 8:35, she headed to the beach, hit A1A, and could hear her daddy preach in her head. She shook it off, geared down, and stopped in Ponte Vedra. There, a gas station attendant said, "It sure is good to see you." "I've been looking for help. Need a job?" he queried. She looked around, heard her name, and heard her dad, and became weary. "I just got here," was her thoughtful reply. "I'd looked to see what all Gulf jobs can supply." With a full tank, the sun getting hot on the white sand, she took to the beach to work on her tan. Thinking this would allow her to fit in better, she left tanned, warm, ready to toss her sweater. "No more North clothing for me," she said, shouting. A job will be found, of that she was sure. The beautiful beaches will make this job search where she can endure. And so, excellent job. Excellent. That was great. All right, now here's Caleb Driscoll. She was a girl from way up north who didn't like the cold. She headed south the day after she turned 18 years old. She made it down to Jacksonville by evening the next day. Within the month, the girl had found a little place to stay. She was finally gearing up to set her life on track. Then came the memories that kept pulling her heart back to the small town home where the leaves turned golden in the fall. She tried to stay away, but she couldn't ignore the call of the whippoorwills and all the bobwhite in the field where the frost is on the hay bales and the air is getting chilled. Early the next morning, she was headed to the beach, hit A1A, and memories came of hearing Daddy preach. She shook it off, geared down, stopped at a filling station. The cashier asked her, "Where are you from in this great nation?" "I'm from a little place where the leaves turn golden in the fall. I try to stay away, but I can't ignore the call of the mockingbird and the gobbler strutting round. I got to get back to that small American town." She loaded up what little things she had left to pack, then took a ride on Cherry Street that sent her heading back. Her daddy heard her coming a mile and a half away and said, "I knew my little girl would come home someday to this little place where the leaves turn golden in the fall, where the children laugh and play and grow up so big and tall. It's the little places in a small town USA where your big life is lived and the prodigal comes home to stay." Excellent. That is excellent. And Caleb, you see how Caleb shifted some of the stuff that we did at first? That was good. Excellent. All right, Dina Kilpatrick, here you go. She was a Yankee girl, didn't like the cold, so she headed south as soon as she got old enough to leave. She made Jacksonville by noon the next day. By sunset, the girl had found a place to stay. She was just gearing up to get hired someplace. She had tricks up her sleeve, and one was an ace. By 8:35, she was headed to the beach, hit A1A, and could hear her daddy preach in her head. She shook it off, geared down, and stopped in Ponte Vedra. There, a gas station attendant said, "It sure is good to see you." The warmth of the sun made her feel free. When she left home, her parents did not agree. Her life was their own to do what felt right. If she had left it up to them, she had never left their sight. When the sand touched her feet, she didn't think twice. If her decision was wrong, she'd pay the price. So she shook her thoughts away. It was time for some fun, remembering she had come this far to feel the heat of the sun. So keep in mind, no matter what you're told, the girl came south because she didn't like the cold. That is great, Dina. That is great. All right, I was afraid we wouldn't have anybody participate, so I wrote the end of one. Okay, here's mine, and then we'll give you the good, the professional one, Jimmy. All right, so here's mine. Let's see. She was a Yankee girl, didn't like the cold, so she headed south as soon as she got old enough to leave. She made Jacksonville by noon the next day. By sunset, the girl found a place to stay. She was just gearing up to get hired someplace. She had tricks up her sleeve, and one was an ace. By 8:35, she was headed to the beach, hit A1A, and could hear her daddy preach in her head. She shook it off, geared down, and stopped in Ponte Vedra. There, a gas station attendant said, "It sure is good to see you." "It's good to be seen," the girl said with a grin. "I'm on vacation looking for some light-hearted sin. Not drinking or drugs, and I ain't having sex, just dinner, movie, and some kissing, nothing complex." Well, all that sounded good to the gas station guy, who stopped and said, "I don't really mean to pry, but just making sure you aren't you, over 21? I mean, there ain't an angry daddy I'll have to outrun." She said, "Yeah, I'm over 21 by a day and a half, and I know my sin restrictions don't rock your seismograph, but if you'll hang in there with me, just toe the line, I believe I can show you a real good time. Let's get the show on the road. I'll change into a dress. You can go with what you're wearing, though your pants ain't pressed." So they got to going. The evening really went well. By the time it was all over, they had a story to tell. The guy asked her to marry him, and she said yes, then affirmed that mere agreement wouldn't get her out of the dress. "I want kids," she said, "but that's for after the wedding. But we can get married tomorrow if that's where your thinking's heading. It's been 10 years now, and they got 5 ugly boys and the 6 pretty daughters, and they make a lot of noise. But they're away from all the other houses on a dead-end street, adding a child every 9 months, like hit and repeat." So, there's me. And now we're going with an award winner, with an award-winning poet. Okay, so I was very curious to see what Jimmy turned in an hour. It was an hour. Okay, this is Jimmy Erie, who's wrote "I Drive Your Truck," he wrote "I Call Mama," he wrote "Gonna Love You Through It." Ton of songs. Okay. She was a Yankee girl, didn't feel the cold, so she headed south as soon as she got old enough to leave. She made Jacksonville by noon the next day. By sunset, the girl had found a place to stay. She was just gearing up to get hired someplace. She had tricks up her sleeve, and one was an ace. By 8:35, she was headed to the beach, hit A1A, and could hear her daddy preach in her head. She shook it off, geared down, stopped in Ponte Vedra. There, a gas station attendant said, "It sure is good to see you." The friendly in his voice calmed her out-of-town fear. He said, "The lost in your eyes tells me you ain't from round here." She smiled and said, "50 in gas on pump number 5, and said, "I don't smoke, but I'll take a pack of Marlboro Lights." She drove down to the beach, walked out on a pier. A big storm was coming, though the forecast was clear. She lit the cigarette and took it in one big old puff, then threw it in the ocean because one was too much. Her dad was a smoker, and that one was for him, and for the cigarette, she'll never see him smoke again. Her daddy was her hero and the center of her world. She'll always be her tough old daddy's little girl. She pulled out a picture of her dad and kissed him one time, put him back in her pocket, and wiped the tear from her eye. The truth, she didn't leave the North because of the cold. Her daddy always loved the beach, and she was too young to get old. That Jimmy Erie. Tag 'em. All right, Mark, you just keep writing, buddy. Well, so that was Poetry Tuesday. Poetry Tuesday. I appreciate you guys being here, and appreciate you guys listening in at home. If you're not a member of wisdomharbor.com, you should be a member. This is the connecting point for adults and young people. This is connecting families in a huge way. We are creating America's next greatest generation out of the school kids today, but we need your help because the way that happened was with the parents and the teachers and the police and the adults in society at that time who had relationships with those kids, and they taught those kids how to have conversations and how to agree to disagree. And so Wisdom Harbor is a very, very inexpensive gift you can give your family. I mean, when I say very inexpensive, a month is, I looked at the grocery store last night, a month subscription to Wisdom Harbor is less than 5 eggs at the grocery store. A year's subscription for a single person, a year's subscription to Wisdom Harbor is 2 COVID tests, like $20-something. And an entire year's subscription for an entire family, up to up to 8 devices, is less than half a tank of gas. And so, but this to connect you with your grandchildren, with your children, with your adult children, with teachers, with people in your community, so that we can start kids on the road to conversations about things we're all interested in. Wisdomharbor.com. Billy Paget, thank you. And we appreciate you guys being here. And we'll do it again soon. All right, bye-bye.